Sadie, would you mind closing the door for me? I would appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on Greek sacred spaces and ritual. And so we are talking about, we're moving into like the high classical period. The Agora, which we have, is a little bit before that. And so number 26 in your note takers, you have a plan for the Agora, okay? So we're gonna watch a video. This is not the Smart History article. You do have that one as well that you can look at. And what I want you to focus on is when we watch this video, how is the Agora more than just a market, a place where people go shopping? So we're focusing on the function of the Agora, why it was so important to Athenia daily life. Okay, I think I have to pause the video recording. So if you are watching this remotely, click that link there to be able to watch the video. Okay, so besides it being a marketplace, what else was it? Besides being a marketplace, chit chat with your neighbor. Go ahead and chit chat with your neighbor and then we'll talk as a group. What else was there? Neighbors.
There was a lot of caring.
Next topic. Okay, so what were some of the things besides it being a market? What else happened here? You guys are talking, yeah.
I don't remember if this was in this particular video, but like when I was taking notes, it said the Athenian Agora was kind of like the heart of democracy. There was a lot of like public discourse and debate in this area.
Mm-hmm. It's where all the governmental buildings were too. Yes, so it's a place for the democracy, or just a place for the government to meet. It was a place for debate. And they did that a lot in the Solas. We'll show examples of the Solas, those little hangout, kind of like porch areas. They talked a lot about that temple. So if there's temples, it must also have religious places to it too, right? So you have this image, right, in your image set. I'll show you some additional ones. You might want to, in your note takers or in the study guide, you might want to make some marks and like circle things so that you know what the different parts are and the things that are the most important parts of the city. Or this center of the city. It's one of the few plans without buildings that we have in the entire 250. Okay, so here's a reconstruction of the Agora. So you can see that there was many different buildings as well as different walkways kind of going through it. And so here's another reconstruction of it, and kind of comparing to the one that we have, where you can see they kept a very generic basic one for us. So a couple of things to kind of highlight is the Panthetic way, right? The Panthetic way. That was a major ceremonial road, a ceremonial walkway, right? And so you can see that it really goes through the heart of the Agora. Okay, and then I have a few other buildings kind of circled here as well. And so we have a Solus and the Vulturon. So a Solus is basically a circular temple or a circular structure. We use that term Solus interchangeably for a lot of things in architecture. It could be a round temple, it could be a round hut. So like a lot of early Roman houses were like these round huts with roofs. You see the Etruscans living and burying their dead in similar sort of structures. And so we have the Solus and the Vulturon there. And what those were is those were the seats of government. Okay, so you know a little bit about Athenian democracy already from your previous history classes. There was elected officials who ruled. And it's not exactly the kind of democracy we live by today, but in the Bulteron, what they basically had is they had a council of 500. So there's 500 representatives who would meet in this large structure. So the large structure is the one that has the post and lintel architecture to it, right? So it would be this large structure here. And so that's where a lot of the daily parts of government would happen. And then there was in the Solus, it was kind of like the executive branch, the most senior officials from the Bulteron, right? They would meet in a much smaller council, and that would be in the Solus, in that circular structure, okay? So this was a place of government. So that's one function of the Agora, or she liked to say the Agora, which I think is the more Greek pronunciation of it. Okay. I'm going to go back here. You see that it was a circular sort of structure, the Solus. And so probably, I think if I remember right, basically what it would be is like stadium seating in the round. And then in the very center of the Solus would be a circular platform where you would speak from, right? So if you were addressing, you'd be basically addressing a crowd kind of like all around you, kind of like a Greek theater, which is like in the hillside. We'll see an example of Greek theater a little bit later. Okay. There was also those stoas that Paris was sort of talking about, what she was talking about. People would just go here and meet each other and debate politics, debate philosophy. These took place in stoas. So stoas basically are colonnades. The buildings themselves were really just like almost like a hypostyle. It was just a roof held up by columns. And there really wasn't an interior space. It was not the common. It really was, and you can see it sort of here is a platform, a series of columns, and a roof. And so it was a way of blocking the sun, because the Athenian sun is very hot, it's a Mediterranean climate. Get you out of the sun, you get into the shade, and you could sit and talk to friends. You could debate politics. You could debate philosophy. A lot of the philosophy also took place in gardens, right? In underneath olive trees, right? But they would do that in the stoa. Much later, the Roman stoa, and that's the one that they showed on the video, was built. So during Roman times, they continued to add to this. And this one had a bunch of stalls. So can you see these stalls? Those would have been like the market, right? That would have had different shops where you could go and buy different things. And there would have been different structures as well that would have shops as well to make this kind of into a more usual kind of marketplace. Today, they mentioned it, when you go to the Agora, it has the museum there. So a lot of their artifacts are on display there. So you can see things like sculptures, coins, pottery, things like that. And so this is actually a Greek vessel of a stoa. So you can see women gathering to gather water on the stoa. And so if you remember, we said the Greek women didn't really leave the house very often. And so this is one of the few images that shows how they would go and meet together underneath stoas and gather water and probably talk, get out of the house. Okay, and then we also have numerous religious structures. So we have government, we have commerce, right? We have philosophy, which could also be kind of considered debate and religion as well. But there are numerous temples, temples to Ares, temples to 12 gods. There's a Hellenistic temple, which is the Roman time, right? Temple of Apollo, altar of Zeus, as well as the Panthetic way, right? And we'll talk about that Panthetic way in just a second. course, this is the big temple, which I, of course, forgot to circle. Okay, so the Panthetic Way. The Panthetic Way was really in the heart of the city. It started at the Diphon Gate, which is the entrance to the city. Okay, that's where that Diphon vase was that we saw, that crater, that was that death marker, right? It was for a burial. There was a cemetery at the outside the walls or outside the city. And at the Diphon Gate, we have the start of the Panthetic Way. And you can see that it goes through the Agora and it kind of meanders around and then it goes and makes its way up to the Acropolis, okay? So this was a processional way that was used to get into the Acropolis, but was also used once a year to celebrate Athena's birthday, right? So Athena's birthday, of course, Athena is the goddess. She is the patron goddess of the city of Athens, right? And so this kind of takes you through the heart of the city and takes you up to the Acropolis, which is an elevated spot, which of course is where the gods live. We discussed that the other day. So there was a lot of pomp and circumstances associated with the Panthetic procession, that once a year celebration. They would, like the most important people, the uber elite in Athens would walk in a processional, right? Of course, there'd be lots of priests and priestesses as well, a lot of religious pomp and circumstance. And they'd walk and they'd bring offerings to her. They bring her a change of clothes. They bring food. And we will see illustrations of this in the friezes of the Parthenon. And that's why we kind of spend a lot of time kind of dissecting the context of this, is because we can see it represented in the decoration. Okay, so here is the Panthetic procession. These were once upon a time parts of the Parthenon. Now they're in museums, right? They're either at the Acropolis Museum at the foot of the hill, or they're in the British Museum in London. Okay, so Pericles, they alluded in the video about Pericles. He was the ruler who rebuilt the Acropolis. So the Acropolis was destroyed by whom? Who destroyed the Acropolis? The Persians destroyed it. And so under the leadership and the government of Pericles, they decided to rebuild the Acropolis bigger and better than what it was. So all those old sculptures were buried. Remember how we saw that core figure and she was buried in kind of like a sculpture cemetery? That actually was right here on the Acropolis. So many of them were kind of found underground right there. Okay, so we're going to focus on temple construction and decoration and how they were used for ritual. Okay, so we have the plan for the Acropolis. Now you have this in two different places. You have something that looks like this in your note takers, right? In your note, excuse me, in your study guide, looks just like this. And the one in the note takers is a slightly different illustration. This is the one that might pop up on the AP test. Okay, so I want to make sure that page that you have there was made by someone else. I did include it in the next page. So can you see the plan is on the second page, right? So on that first page that says Acropolis, I only have like some basic information there. I don't expect you to fill out the same information for every single piece of the Acropolis. What I basically did is try to focus on just the plan on one page, the structures on another page, and the artworks on separate pages. So you just fill in whatever is relevant to those specific artworks. Does that make sense? You don't have to keep replying context, like you don't have to do context 7 times because there's 7 images. Does that make sense? Okay. So this video is the one we will watch, right? After Central goes, and Central, you'll watch it for homework. what you're basically gonna do is in the study guide, I have the order of architecture for the three styles of Greek temples, and we'll do that, we'll fill it out. And the reason we need to know it is the sculptures are in these spots. So why is the sculpture a square? Oh, because it goes here in the building. Why is the sculpture shaped like that? Oh, it goes in a triangular niche, okay? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So in the study guide, or on the plan, it doesn't matter to me, we're gonna focus on identifying the different buildings and their function on the Acropolis. Okay, so the first thing that you will encounter, and for some reason my animation is off, my circle is missing, it's this thing right here, right? So right here, at the very bottom center, this is called the Propolis. Now, we actually know the name of the architect. His name was Menecles. Okay, so the Propolis was made by Menecles. Does anyone know what its function is? What is the function of the Propolis? Anyone? Okay, I'm going to go back here really fast to this picture. Okay, so if you notice, the Pantheonic way is not axial, right? Remember when we looked at the Acropolis at Delphi, how I said they really built into their natural environment. So what we have here is a natural hill in the city of Athens. And so the Pantheonic way went into that hill, kind of meanders around, and then it goes up a set of staircases, okay? So it is not axial, right? And so this is a ceremonial gateway to the Acropolis, right? It's a ceremonial gateway. So the Pantheonic way led you to this entrance, okay? It led you to this entrance. So this is what it looks like today. So you kind of walk up these stairs and you see a series of temples, right? There's temples on your left, temples on your right, and then the entrance itself also looks like a temple, okay? It's not necessarily a temple, it's just a gateway. It gets you into the rest of the Acropolis, okay? So this is a reconstruction of what it looked like in Greek times. You can see how it's fortified. The Acropolis is really nice because it is on a very steep incline. It's kind of like natural defenses from invaders. Of course, the Persians got up there and destroyed. However, for other parts of history, it was pretty much protected because it had these steep sides to it and really just like one way to get in. And so they would just put all their forces at the front, right, and guard it so that people couldn't get into there. Okay, so on the left side of the Propolis, there's a little building here, and this is called the Pinnacle, and it is actually an art gallery. There was an art gallery on the Acropolis. It had beautiful examples of Greek painting. We have no Greek paintings left. We have nothing. The only Greek painting we really have is pottery. But the Romans wrote about how amazing the Greeks were at painting realistically and illusionistically. And we think that they probably painted very similar to how the Romans did. And we will see examples of Roman painting. Romans loved to emulate and copy themselves after the Greeks. And so we think that their style was probably very similar or influenced by that. Okay, so then the structure on the right is the Temple of Nike Athena by the architect Callicrates. Okay, it's a rather small temple. The Greeks did not necessarily think temples had to be enormous. That's a Roman thing, right? The bigger the better for the Romans. So the Temple of Nike Athena is a rather small little temple, and you would see it kind of built on top of the fortification of the Acropolis, okay? And this temple is dedicated to Athena as the goddess of victory of war. So Athena was not just the patron goddess of Athens, but she was also the goddess of war, right? She was the goddess of war. And all of the arts on this small little temple references the defeat of the Persians, right? Why would they put such a small temple with this artwork about the defeat of the Persians at the entrance of the Acropolis? What does that say about the Greeks? What does that say about the Greeks? What can be inferred by it? Go ahead and chit chat with your neighbor. Why would they put images of the defeat of the Persians at the entrance? What do you think? What's an educated guess? Yeah. It's an intimidation tactic. It is basically, look how great we are. There's, humanism, man can achieve. Look at us. We don't have to be ostentatious. We don't have to have a big, giant celebratory temple to our defeat of the Persians. We can have a really small, understated sculpture, but we're going to show you imagery about why we're so good and how we could possibly have defeated the Persians, right? Every last structure on the Acropolis is dedicated to Athena in some sort of way. Every single one. Every single one. There's several different structures. The Propolis is not a temple, but it's an entrance to, right, the Acropolis dedicated to Athena, right? The art museum, not necessarily dedicated to her, but it's not a temple either. It's an art gallery. But this temple, as well as all the other ones, are somehow connected to her, okay? So this is an Ionic temple. And of course, the question says, how do we know? We will know it from that video that we're going to watch in just a few moments, okay? So this is a temple that we call an Ionic temple. It has a formula that all Greek Ionic temples had to have, okay? So it has columns that are fluted, and then it has these scroll capitals to them. Those are called volutes, right? Those little spirally things, right? And then they have a base at the bottom of the temple, okay? Ionic orders also have friezes. So this little horizontal band right there, right? It always has decoration, right? In sculptural relief there as well, okay? So this is a formula that, because the Greeks were obsessed with order and logic, all Ionic temples had exactly the same parts. Okay. This is also an Acropolis temple. It has a porch in the front and a porch in the back. And you can see that the cella is kind of like the heart or the ceremonial place in a temple. You can see how that's in the very center of it. There's only one entrance into it though. So that back porch is just kind of for hanging out, right? Kind of like a stoa, right? But you can't really get inside the temple from that back side. You have to go through that front portico. But we'll see, the only other temple we really have is the Parthenon. And so we'll look at that one later. Okay, so here you have a page that's dedicated to the Temple of Nike Athena in your notes. And so we know the architect's name is Callicrates, and we have an image from that temple as well, right? This is called Victory Adjusting Her Sandal, right? And of course, now my animation is off, so I apologize for that. So you get it all here instead of asking the question. How is it classical? How is it high classical? So on Friday, we ended kind of talking about the very basic characteristics of high classical art and high classical sculpture. And so we have our idealized proportion, right? Remember with Dorothea, he said, right, that the human body is like 7.5 heads tall. So even though she's missing her head, we can tell her body is very proportional. And we can tell her body is proportional. She's in an active pose. Can you guys see that? She was part of a parapet, and we'll look at that in a second. She was like on this wall, and there would have been a series of Nikes there. And so Victory Nike, right? You guys know that, right? So adjusting her sandal. So she actually is kind of like her wings are holding her up in balance. You can see one of them is topping off of the wall, right? And she's leaning and she's fixing her sandal, right? So her wing is like the counterbalance with like contrapposto. One side is active, right? The other side, opposite side is active with her wing. And then one is relaxed and then one is relaxed. Okay, so she's actually doing a realistic thing, right? It looks very lively. It's not stiff and formal. She has that wet, clingy fabric that we'll see on other sculptures on the Parthenon. And you can see the female form kind of pressing through that fabric. You see a little bit of the cascading off her shoulder. You can see her breast. You can see her abdomen. You can see her legs pressing through that fabric. Okay, so this was a part of a parapet. So parapet is basically like a foundational wall, right? She was on this foundational wall, probably right here, and she would have been one of a series of these Nike figures, right? They would be symbols of the Athenian victory, right, over the Persians, as well as all others as well. So this is what it looks like today. You can see it's missing its roof, it's missing its pediment, which is that triangular section. But we do have a lot of the structure. It has the Solas kind of protected by a wall. And there probably would have been weaponry and other spoils kept in that cella. But this was not the main temple to Athena, so it probably isn't where the most of the treasury was. That wouldn't be a very good place to hide your wealth, right at the entrance of the Acropolis to begin with. Okay, so then once you go into the Acropolis, you could go into a number of different structures. The Pinnacle Way actually led you around, and the entrance to the Parthenon is actually right here. It's not this one that you would encounter first. You'd actually have to walk around here. And almost all religious ceremonies did not take place inside the temples. They took place outside. And so you can actually see that there's kind of a larger space there. That would be used for an exterior gathering of people. And there would be a ceremonial bonfire there. Right? So most of the religious practice took place on the outside. So more of the common everyday people would be outside of the structure. That doesn't mean people didn't come inside to pay homage, but it would be much more sacred and much more reserved for the uber elites, right? And so the Parthenon's function is it's dedicated to Athena, who's the patron goddess of the city, right? It would have enshrined a colossal sculpture of her, and this sculpture was monumental, and it could see outside of the temple, and it overlooked the city, and it overlooked the harbor. So when you're at the top of the Acropolis and you look far out, kind of like south of it, you can start to see the ocean, the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, you see the water. And so it would be there to kind of as a protector goddess as well. She was protecting from invasion, right? The others would be coming from sea. And all of the decoration on the Parthenon is somehow related to her life, right? So her birth story, all the Panthetic processional imagery, celebrating her, but also speaks to the history of Athens and how she became the patron goddess of the city. So here's a recreation of what it looked like. We know that architect's name is Ephenos, and then Menocles again, who also did the Propolis. They were the architects of the building. And so you have an image of the Parthenon, okay? So this structure had a mathematical ratio, which we'll talk about. And so we see that it has what we call a stylobate. So this is like this platform that you see. Notice how there's like steps on all four sides of the Parthenon. You could basically walk up any side you wanted to in that structure if you needed to get into it. Unlike the Romans, who normally had just like one entryway, you can pretty much get into a temple like up this walkway, and then you could walk in either on the front or into the back of it. Okay, so the main ceremonial hall in Solas is right here. This is where the temple of Athena would be. That would be the colossal. And then this back area was the treasury. That's where they put the wealth of the city or anything that was donated and given to Athena, like weaponry, gold, anything precious would be placed there under protection. Okay, and so here's a recreation of the colossal sculpture of her. One of many that would have been placed there. I think this is the recreated imagery that you can find in Athens, Georgia. There's a recreation of the Parthenon there. You can see the sculpture there if you're ever going to make it. And we'll start here tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And then I'm going to have North people open up your study guides. Right, so we're going to open up our study guides to, we're in 20, right? And you're going to find, they look like this. You guys see this? Right, so if you have it, it's going to look like this. I'm going to have you watch the video and fill out the different parts. Okay, it's a video of me doing it. I was going to do it today, but the other teacher dismantled the system I had set up, which is fine. But what we'll do is we'll highlight the parts that you need to memorize because those are where the sculptures are. That's how you remember the different kinds of temples. I'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
Now, because this is me, I wonder if it's going to copyright it, but you know, I'm going to go ahead and pause it. So if you are at home, you want to watch this video, Temple Orders of the Greeks on my channel.